Welcome to the Redeemer Podcast. I'm your host, Zach, and today we are talking about Redeemer's Theology program. I am joined by current Redeemer fourth year student, Evan Maxwell. If it is your first time here, make sure to like and subscribe, share with a friend, and check out some of our other episodes that explore various aspects of Redeemer Christian education and so much more. Thank you for making us part of your day, and with that, here we go. I am so excited today. I have an amazing guest with me. I introduce to you Evan Maxwell of the Theology program. Evan, are you ready to talk about your program at Redeemer?
Dude, I'm ready to nerd out. I'm ready to talk about it. Something I love a lot. So I'm excited.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's the first episode of 2024. Are you ready?
Sweet. I'm so excited. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah. So, Evan, let's just get right into this here. Let's let our listeners know, how did you, well, first off, what are you studying at Redeemer? Well, theology, but like, what made you want to study theology? And you're in your fourth year, right?
Yeah, I'm in my fourth year.
Okay, final semester you're in. That's exciting. So yeah, can you try to remember back to, before you came to Redeemer, how did you hear about Redeemer, and ultimately why did you pick, to study theology?
Yeah, sweet. Well, maybe I'll start with an introduction.
Yeah.
We heard this already. My name's Evan Maxwell. I'm in my fourth year. I'm studying theology, and social work is my minor. Okay. Way back when, in the COVID times, when I applied to Redeemer, it was actually the only school I applied to. I had heard a couple of friends, older siblings, had gone to the school and had loved their time there. And I just sort of like prayed about it. I was like, I don't really want to go to a huge sort of secular or normal university, because I had grown up in public school. So I thought, this one sounds amazing. It's so close. I'll just apply. And I got in early, and I decided that's it. I'm done applying, and off we went. Yeah.
That's really cool. And could you maybe we're going to journey through, I know I'm asking you to go walk down memory lane here a little bit.
That's all right.
Starting at first year, what was your experience coming into the program, starting at Redeemer?
Yeah, I think I may have actually like a really normal story in terms of a Redeemer University career. I started off with social work as my major.
Okay.
And I think I had urban and intercultural ministry as a minor. So in that first year, I was taking a few social work classes, and actually my introduction to the REL courses, or the theology courses, were through the REL 110 classes, or the core courses. And so as I was taking those, as we were going through the 6 acts of scripture that they'll talk about, I'm a huge advocate for the core program. I actually love it a lot, probably because those first couple like REL classes, those first couple of CTS and HUM classes, really sort of like formed what I was thinking about at the time. And I was going through these social work classes. Though I love social work and it's super helpful, I was like, I don't know, I just love talking about creation and God the creator, and how that interacts with the world, and how we sort of lay out the way we think about God and the way we think about life and ethics, and how do we worship him, how do we rightly speak about him. And these are the sort of things they were talking about in like lay terms. And I grew up in the church, but not the Reformed church, so it was super interesting to hear this liturgical language, but also just a really robust and like narrative based sort of like telling of scripture. And I'm like, this is so interesting. I don't know how I could go my whole university career without like solely focusing on this. And so the next semester I switched into the theology program, and I've really just loved it ever since.
That's so awesome. No, thank you for sharing. And yeah, I often will joke with people is, are you even a Redeemer student if you haven't changed your major or your minor at least once, right?
At least once. Yeah. Totally.
That's awesome. No, and a great story to share. Thank you. And so first year, you kind of got exposure into theology and kind of this grander story. What was it like then going into second year, as a committed, theology student?
Yeah, great question. In the second year, you start to take a couple of those more pointed classes. And through my time at Redeemer, at least, there's been like a little bit of a shift in the faculty in the theology department. There's been a couple that have stayed mainly the same. But sort of the story of my career through Redeemer, at least, in theology, is just like a look into people's lives. Um, I had like two main classes that stuck out in that year. You start to get a little more of a sense of what you're going to be thinking about, or at least I did. I took systematic theology, which seemed a little scary to me at first because systematic was not a word I would have used growing up, or people would have used around me. I grew up in the United Church of Canada, very deliturgized, or deliturgized, sorry. And I don't know, there's huge new language, but then being able to step into a world of Karl Barth, and these giants of the faith, but really just so accessible. I've never thought of myself as a super smart guy, and I'm always a little intimidated by huge books. And I feel like a lot of people think that theology is just a lot of huge books of dead guys talking about God. But it's just so accessible in the words they use. It's like, it's hard not to love it, honestly. And the professors I had, I forget who was there. They were an adjunct professor, so they're gone now. But Ken Hurst was one of the theology professors at the time, a great man.
Great man.
Not unlike many other professors that are in the theology program and Redeemer generally. But just the stories they would tell in talking about a lot of these theological terms. He did spiritual formation, which is a class I took. I don't think you have to take it. However, it's just like I got to latch on to the lives and like the words of these people that made these like really dense, like tiring words come to life because it had affected them so greatly, because they could speak about it well. And like the God who created them, they're like, it's actually not boring. It's actually so beautiful because it's talking about ways we can rightly connect with God. And that just like, it just threw me into a huge new world for myself. And now as a reader, I don't think I've read a non-theology book as like just personal reading for the last like 3 years or so. It just like, it jumps out in a way that I can't really fully explain. So coming into my second year, at least for me, it just sort of points you more so towards like specific ways you can engage with that. So systematic theology, the ways you can talk about God and the direct doctrines and like spiritual formation, the ways in which those doctrines actually come to life and we can use tools speaking about God and worshiping him to be closer to him. So it just like, that step was huge for me, at least from the general to the specific.
Wow, that's beautifully put, and you did such a great job of articulating how it's impacted you in your personal life and not just your education, but as a whole person, and that's really exciting.
Yeah,
And wow, that's only that's only into your second year of the program. Evan, for third year here, I have a quick story here. So
totally.
When I studied at Redeemer, I did not study theology. I took a couple of theology courses, as electives, but I had some friends that majored in theology. And I remember when they got to third year, I'd text them and I'd be like, hey, you want to hang out tonight? And they'd be like, sorry, can't, writing a paper. And I'd be like, okay.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay, cool. But then the next night, I'd be like, hey, like, want to like hang out tonight? And they're like, sorry, can't, writing a paper. And I'm like, same paper? And they're like, nope, different paper. and we could you talk about, kind of the practical component? Like, obviously, in a program like theology, there is a lot of history involved. There is scripture involved. But, like, is it a lot of presentations and papers, or, like, what do exams look like throughout the program?
Yeah, awesome question. Hilarious story too. It feels a little bit like the story of my life. But Um, yeah, in the theology program, you get a little bit of a mixed bag. Um, what I've come to know is that sort of papers are like the watermark,
Hmm.
um, but not constant papers. However, they are sort of like encompassing papers. So you do have to take time and spend hours working on it. But it doesn't, to me at least, it doesn't feel like a chore.
Hmm.
It does feel really, really wonderful to be able to engage with that. Presentations, I've had a few in the program, although they don't seem to be super common. Um, However, as you get to your third and fourth year, what I love about the theology program is there are seminar courses. Um, so I took one called Pentateuch and one called Reading Scripture through the Global Church. And so those classes sort of focused more so on like a seminar style where you would like lead or facilitate a discussion for a class, which was a little scary to me at first and seemed somewhat daunting. I've since gotten used to it and comfortable with the idea of that, but presentations seem to be a little more common later on in the theology program and sort of public speaking. You might get a test here and there in the program, but it seems to mainly be papers, readings, and some presentations.
Awesome. And I can't and I know we got a little tangent there from my story, but that's great
No,
insight
that's
into the
okay.
program, especially if you're watching this and you're someone considering the theology program. That's kind of what you can expect. But let's maybe talk into what was your third year of university in the program like at Redeemer?
Yeah. Um, yeah, in my third year, I started taking a couple more specific classes, and you sort of had the ability to specialize somewhat. You could take more classes. There was more available to you um, in those classes that you really wanted to take. So a couple classes I was able to take was reading scripture through the global church,
Right.
the Pentateuch, so the first five books of the Bible, and the New Testament writings. So going through Paul and a couple other writers. And in there was a smattering of smaller classes. And I forgot to mention a really wonderful class that you can look forward to if you're entering into the theology program for the listeners is the Reformed theology. The Reformed theology class, which is taught by Jess Joustra. She's a wonderful teacher. So as you go through that, you'll sort of get a sense for where Redeemer's coming from in their doctrines, and it feels a little more accessible to you then. But as you go into your third year, this is where if I could use an example, I'll be right back.
Oh, of course, yeah.
I've been reading this book recently, A Burning in My Bones. It's a biography on Eugene Peterson,
Okay.
the translator of the Message.
Yeah.
And so it's like a practical understanding of what the scriptures say, and you sort of get a sense of a guy who just really loves the scriptures and loves hearing about God. And like people like that, I didn't really understand maybe until this year fully, because you sort of just like walk through a couple of those pieces that I might consider boring or monotonous had I not read them closely before, or not had somebody to walk me through with it. So going through the Pentateuch and Leviticus, Exodus, all the longer like law books that you might think Deuteronomy, I honestly just skipped right past them when I would personally read growing up. But they start to jump out and they start to feel alive to you. Every little piece has a context. Every little piece has an application. And as you walk through those pieces, you start to be engrossed in the life of the scripture and the life of the Israelites, and you start to see the language that they're using, and maybe why they did like these sacrifices in the temples. Like what did that mean? And though it can feel boring at the outset, there's so much richness in meditating on these things, because no one fully understands scripture through the first read. So what I feel like the third year courses that Redeemer offers does really well is sort of just lets you know the aliveness of scripture, and how these single little pieces, through what can feel like boring, what we call exegetical reading, or reading the meaning out of the text, can become alive and wonderful and rich, even though you're reading about some donkey on a road, or some water bucket, or whatever the name was called there. There's so much significance that pulls it out and tells you something more about God. So through those classes that I took, that's sort of what I felt like the third year program did really well.
Wow. Okay. So third year, you got a lot out of third year, and
totally.
Shout out Dr. Joustra, amazing prof. That and I think a lot of people that take the theology program will mention the profs like you've done, and just it's so nice that you have that. Like there's scripture, there's also like kind of the spiritual guidance and mentorship, but also kind of that extra component of your peers and your classes that you're doing it together and learning together. And could you maybe and we'll get to your fourth year in a minute, but could you maybe just talk a little bit about what has that community been like in the classroom?
Oh, great question, actually. And well put to talk about the people and the scriptures, but also the community alongside that. Redeemer is a small school compared to some other secular universities, and the theology program, wonderfully enough, is a little smaller, and that's honestly what I kind of love about it, because generally I've been with the same core crew for about 3 years now. I recognize the same people through the classes. I know what they think about it. They know what I think about it. We've discussed these things, but there is also like a wonderful camaraderie in trying to parse out what this God is saying to us, what our God is saying to us through the scriptures that we're all learning about. And not one of us, I think, has the same theological or church walk. Not one of us, I think, grew up in the same sort of church environment or the same place. Though there is some consistency in reformed churches, as there's a lot of reformed people in the school. But it's really just wonderful to sort of spend that time with the same people, going through it with different opinions, and people that I call friends after many years of just doing that with them, and earnestly just trying to seek out what God means to say to us. So it's been a great community, honestly, and I don't think that's unlike any other community you would get through another program. Though in your third and fourth years, the classes do tend to get smaller, which is honestly kind of great, because it's those people that you've seen. We're like, oh, we can really just speak more and discuss more and learn more intimately about what we really want to do.
That's awesome. And again, like that's one of the advantages of deciding to go to a smaller school like Redeemer is you get that atmosphere, which at a larger school you just wouldn't, right?
Sure.
So Evan, let's kind of complete your journey here, and then we got a couple other questions for you. So I know you're in the middle of fourth year right now. The home stretch is the end is in sight. But what has fourth year, first semester up to this point been like for you?
Yeah, great question. So in my first couple of years, ambitiously, I took a bunch of theology or rel code courses, and so I had a lot of room for electives in my final year. So I sort of jumped on a couple fun history classes that I was interested. I took an early modern European history class, and just a couple other electives, which was quite fun, to be honest, and was a bit of a load off to be just kind of learning about something new for a minute, and finishing out some social work classes. And finally, in this semester, I've got a final religion course, which is the capstone, which all biblical and theological majors students will take. It's called Gospel, Church, and Culture. And something I'm really excited about is just a class that sort of discovers, and obviously this is me talking straight from the syllabus because I just took the first class a couple of days ago. But just sort of like talks about how the church and how we as Christians engage in culture, cultural content, culture making. Do we have a place in culture? Should we be removed from it? Like what have other theologians, what have other like pastors and great thinkers said about this? So sort of jumping into that, that's something I personally am really interested in as somebody who's looking to go into ministry and who just loves talking with people. Something that comes up always is culture, whether you're talking about whatever sports game they're interested in or what team they follow, whatever like TikTok trend is going on or what book they're reading. It's really shaped and formed by culture. So how do we engage those topics that aren't fully churched, you might say? Mm-hmm. Like that's a question I have and I've been wondering about. So I love that I get to take a class and sort of like the metaphorical walk into the world from finishing university, going out into the big real world, the adult world, but also learning how to do that culturally through the lens of other people who have thought about that question. So I'm really excited to take that course.
Very cool. That's exciting. And that's a perfect segue. You mentioned you're looking to go into ministry. I know of like the theology program has so many different opportunities outside of it. I know graduates have gone on to work in the not-for-profit sector. Some have gone to work in, church ministry or camp ministry or other, kind of untraditional ministry routes. Do you mind me asking what are some of the things you're looking into? Or are you still kind of, I know you're in kind of a spot where you're looking for those opportunities, but do you have any idea?
I classic senior university student. I don't know. Yeah. I'm leaving it up to God's hands. Mm-hmm. You mentioned a great one, camp ministry. That's something I've been involved with. Shout out Ryerson Camp out on Lake Erie. Been working there for a couple of years. Cool. But yeah, a ton of opportunities are out there. I'm really interested to go to seminary, to just like extend my learning in this. But mainly, I really do just care about people. I love to sit with them. If my job full time could just be sitting and having coffee with people, talking about what God's doing in their life, or how to see what God's doing in their life, that would be an amazing job for me. But there's a ton of opportunities, but I think mainly I'm just looking forward to just walking with people and seeing what it looks like to point out God in their lives as I walk with them and see what God's doing in that. So I know that's a very vague and unspecific job prospect, but that's really just all I want to do.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, and I think what a lot of people, and if you're a parent or a prospective student watching this and you're like, what do you do with a theology degree? And I grew up in a pastor's family, so like I understood like, a theology degree, there's actually a lot you can do with that. But for someone who maybe doesn't come from that background, they're asking that question. Do you know what some of your other friends might be doing, or?
Yeah, great question. I know a lot of friends who are interested in going. MacDiv, or McMaster Divinity School, is one that Redeemer's worked with recently. They offer a great biblical counseling program that I know a lot of friends who are interested in and have been going through for a bit. So you can become like a registered minister pastor or like counselor. So in like church environments or even in like professional environments where they offer a faith-based counseling service, you can be somebody to offer those counseling services. Obviously, like being a minister in a church or at a charge, you might call it, you can totally do if you go into ordination. But honestly, a theology degree can go go many places. I know people have gone to further academia, to becoming professors, or writers, as well as being sort of like a cultural or religious sort of consultant on certain topics. I have a couple friends' parents who've been interested and gone into doing that, but it's almost like getting a cultural studies degree, but in religion. Sort of, you have like a wide breadth of understanding on this one religious subject, which does affect a lot of life. Even people outside of the church now seem to think. So it is actually quite helpful to have a theology degree. Maybe not quite as helpful and lucrative as a nursing degree, but it can go many places.
Hey, no, that's a very interesting way to phrase it. That's really cool. Well said, Evan. Thank you. And
yeah, thank you. And maybe that's not true for everybody, but that's what I've seen, at least. Yeah.
Yeah. No. I think you're spot on with that. That's fantastic. And kind of on that note, do you have any favorite parts of the program? I know we've talked about a lot of it that you're clearly passionate about. From like, is there a favorite course that you took, or is there a favorite topic that you specifically enjoyed about the program?
Yeah. Oh, I love this one. So I mentioned earlier the Pentateuch class.
Yep.
So first 5 books of the Bible. The professor who was here at the time was wonderful, and it was sort of like a new way of looking at the Bible that I hadn't before. It was somebody who could read Hebrew sort of very fluently, but also could communicate it really well. So as you were going through like the basic language of the Old Testament, like the root language, he would stop and say, okay, you said that, but the Hebrew says this, and it's not different, but it has maybe a bit of a wider meaning. So my favorite example I tell people when they ask about like my favorite part of the course or the program is, we would go through Moses and the burning bush, and God through the burning bush says, I am who I am. When he asks, what authority do you ask me to do these things, to go and march the Israelites out of slavery? But in Hebrew, this professor was telling us it means I will be who I will be. And like the language it's sort of playing with time a little bit. And something hilarious one of the other students said was like, that's God's way of saying like, hold my drink, watch what I do, to Moses. And like sort of like walking through those little nitty gritty pieces of scripture through a different language that maybe you don't know totally. And there are tools I've learned that you can use to do that without having to fully know the language. But sort of just gives you a wider scope of what people in that time, in that context, understood by it, and maybe isn't sort of readily available in interpretation if you were just alone reading the Bible. And obviously you don't need it, but it's so cool and so helpful to have. So yeah, I would say probably the Old Testament Pentateuch course was my favorite throughout my history.
That's awesome. No, thank you for sharing. And I know we're coming close to the end of our time here, but I just want to finish this off with for anyone who's watching this, if you're a prospective student or a parent or maybe you're at another school thinking of transferring or something like that, what advice would you have for students who are considering Redeemer's Theology program?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, it feels very basic, but I would say get your hands on a dense book of theology that maybe feels a little scary, and just try it. Just go through a couple lines at a time, look up what the words mean, and really sort of start to get to the nitty gritty, because the sooner you sort of are able to understand and speak the language of these people, the more you can sort of understand how they're seeking to rightly display God. And maybe that's not the same for everybody, but the first time I got my hands on one of those really thick books and started to go through it very slowly because I was terrible at reading it, it sort of just changed how I looked at it, because you had this like one simple Bible that you read it the way you think, and then you have somebody else like a commentary or like a doctrine book, and then you can go through it and see, oh, this is talking about this part from the Bible. What are the words that they're using? That's the way they think about it. That's really cool. So where does my opinion lie? What does the Bible say? What do they say? And that's sort of the heart of what you're doing as a theologian, is sort of trying to get that meaning there. What was the context? And if you just start with the Bible and another big book, and just by word, maybe it can just be one line. You just want to try one line. You sort of get to be a theologian for a second. And we're all called to be theologians and to study the Bible as Christians. So the sooner you can sort of speak their language, the cooler it is, I think.
That's awesome. No, Evan, that's fantastic advice. And Evan, I can't thank you enough for coming on this episode of the podcast and representing the theology program very well. And blessings on you as you finish your program. And if you're out there and you're watching this or listening to this and you're interested in more information about the theology program or any program at Redeemer, feel free to email us at admissions@redeemer.ca, and we'll be happy to get in contact with you. But Evan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. This was so much fun to nerd out with you and to chat about theology. I loved it.
Awesome, Evan. Thank you very much.